Hello, CSP. I wanted to share another thought with you about Passover. I was going to share only one, but I couldn't hold back. This is such an important thing for me. When you look at the Passover story and you look at the Passover Seder, what exactly does it mean to go from slavery to freedom? Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, one of the great leaders of the 20th century in the modern Orthodox community and beyond, writes that the essential aspect of a slave, the defining aspect of a slave, is that a slave has no control over her or his time. No control over time because the master is telling the slave when to work, what the deadlines are, when to begin, when to end, when to eat, when to take a break, when to take vacation, if there is such a thing, how long can you take a break for without getting punished. And according to our tradition, the slaves were forced to work sometimes on Shabbat and tried to keep Shabbat anyway. And so think about how important time is in Judaism and Jewish life and in human life. And what would it mean to not have any control over your time? And the movement to freedom is, of course, getting that freedom and that control over your time back. When you look at the Passover Seder itself and the Haggadah, I invite you to pay attention to the text of the Haggadah and to note every instance of a reference to time. And if you look carefully, read it in Hebrew or English, you'll see in the early part of the Haggadah, especially the very early part, we have many, many references to time, to the future, to the past, to when certain obligations begin and kick in, to age, to dawn, to nighttime. And I'm just sharing these hints with you because I want you to look for them or tell your children or grandchildren to look for them and see if you can highlight all those references to time. And it's my belief that all of those references to time are there because by reflecting on our relationship with different aspects of time, when do things begin, when do they end, how long is the duration of a certain practice or activity, what's the right age for certain things or the natural age for certain things, and so on, we begin to become aware and therefore to bring control and ultimately mastery of our own time. And just to end with one thought, the enemy in the Passover story is, of course, Paro. And Paro's name itself comes from the Hebrew word, the root word, assuming it's Hebrew or if you take it as a Hebrew word as it appears in the Bible, for two things. One is payback. So when a person borrows money and then goes to pay his debt, that payback is called a peraon. Pei resh ayin is the same root as the word paro. And the other thing it means, it's deeply related to this, is the word that appears in some of the most complicated discussions of the Talmud and some of the most interesting discussions of the Talmud. The word limafreya. Limafreya has the same roots, pei resh ayin, and it means retroactive, something that happens or takes place retroactively. And the power of something that's retroactive in a literal sense in the Talmud is, let's say I want to buy a car from you, and we agree that the car will have been bought. When I pay you tomorrow, the car will have been bought from the first of the month. Let's say we want to do that for insurance purposes. So you can transfer the insurance from March 1st. But I'm only going to pay you because I'm only going to see you on March 5th. But we decide together, and it's in the contract, that the sale will take place from March 1st, even though the actual transaction will only take place later. That means that the sale is happening retroactively. But the power of something retroactive is the power of rewriting history, retelling a story, understanding a story in new ways. And one of the questions we need to ask about Passover is, how do we understand the experience of slavery in Egypt now that we are free? And this is one of the vantage points that the Seder itself creates for us. We are now sitting in freedom as royalty with a meal, hopefully with plenty of food, with comfort, leaning to the left like kings and queens in our chairs at certain critical points of the Seder, drinking wine, celebrating, and looking backwards at a time that we suffered. Now, of course, when we were in the suffering, it was suffering. We just experienced the suffering. If we had an inkling of a dream of relief, that would have been something to be grateful for. It would have been a surprise. Slaves who are experiencing oppression are not generally thinking about, don't have access to the feelings of freedom and relief that might come at a future date. But now that we're free, we can put ourselves back in the mindset of our suffering, our collective suffering in Egypt, but also the sufferings of Jewish history and also our own experiences of pain in our own lives. And is there a way to understand it retroactively now through the lens of the wisdom, the insight that we have accumulated over time, and the blessings we've experienced that might put that experience of suffering into a new context? Is there a way of understanding the past through the lens of the present as deeper, more rich, more complicated, more nuanced, maybe even more of a blessing than we originally thought? This is not to deny the experience of suffering. Suffering is suffering, and some things just should not happen. There are kinds of suffering that we need to prevent at all costs. But in our own lives, it's often the case that we do find some kind of new meaning in the experience. Paro's name itself points to this by telling us, pay attention to the retroactive nature of storytelling and how we tell stories about the past in ways that bring new light to the past. Through the Passover Seder and its encounters with time, the mechanisms and the technology that it uses to help us become more aware of time, beginnings and endings, night and dawn, young age and old age, the movement of time, the movement of a lifetime and many lifetimes, the movement of the months and the years of the calendar. We become masters of our own time, and we get our time back. And then we are able to see the past through new eyes and make better decisions going forward about how we use our time. So pay attention to all the references to time in the early part of the Seder. Let me know what you come up with. And I bless you all and bless me back to become free on every level, and especially to become free in our relationship with time and the stories we tell about our past.